Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Picture this. A 110-pound woman effortlessly throwing 3 grown men across a room.
Oh, wow.
Right. Or a colossal, unexplainable 900-foot rock erupting out of nowhere in the flat plains of Wyoming.
Yeah, completely defying geology.
And then a horrific winged beast dives bombing a trolley car in 20th century New Jersey, plus ancient firelit valleys outside Jerusalem where people literally sacrifice their own children.
It is quite the list.
It is. So today we are unpacking the ultimate central tension of human history. Are demons and the devil literal physical entities constantly warring against God? Or are they, elaborate psychological constructs?
Constructs meticulously designed to, well, explain the unexplainable.
Exactly. To manage our deepest terrors and ultimately keep societies perfectly in line.
I mean, it is arguably the most fascinating tension in human sociology.
For sure.
We're really looking at the historical mechanics of how humanity personifies evil and the incredibly tangible physical impact that belief has on the real world.
I couldn't agree more. And before we get completely lost in the dark woods of history, if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button.
Always a good reminder.
Yeah. Because today's deep dive is all about understanding our absolute obsession with giving evil a face, a name and a backstory.
Right.
And to really grasp this, we have to travel back to the very root of the concept.
We really do. And if we analyze the ancient origins of Satan, specifically looking through a sociological and secular atheistic lens, what we are really examining is the raw utility of fear.
The utility of faith.
Exactly. In early human history, creating a singular architect of evil wasn't just about theology.
Right.
It was an essential tool for survival and structural control.
Well, I actually want to push back on that word utility for a second.
Oh, okay.
Because calling it a structural tool feels a bit, clinical.
Fair enough.
When you look at the history of the Valley of Hinnom, which sits just outside the ancient walls of Jerusalem, you aren't just looking at crowd control. You're looking at blinding, irrational terror.
Yes, absolutely.
Historically, this valley is where certain ancient communities, heavily influenced by what we now call satanic rituals, literally built giant pits of fire to sacrifice their firstborn children.
It's horrific to even think about.
It really is. How does a population get to a point where that seems like a logical choice?
Well, you have to put yourself in the mindset of an ancient agrarian society.
Okay, paint the picture.
Imagine you're a farmer in antiquity. Your entire existence relies on the rain.
Right. No rain, no food.
Exactly. If the rains don't come, your crops fail, and your entire community slowly starves to death. And the thing is, the human brain is notoriously terrible at accepting random, chaotic tragedy.
We hate it. We always need a reason.
We do. It is psychologically devastating to just accept that the universe is indifferent. So the mind demands an agent. It needs someone to blame.
So Satan basically becomes the ultimate cosmic scapegoat.
That's a great way to phrase it.
Because if your children are starving, it's not just bad luck, it's an angry demon withholding the rain.
Yes. And if you have an entity to blame, that means you also have a way to negotiate.
Even if the price of that negotiation
is absolutely horrifying. Precisely. It turns the terrifying randomness of nature into a transaction.
Wow.
People genuinely believed that if they did not appease these demonic spirits with the ultimate sacrifice, everyone would die.
That level of fear is just hard to comprehend.
It is. Now, what's crucial here is the theological pivot that happens next.
Oh, right, with Jeremiah.
Yes. If you read the book of Jeremiah, God speaks through the prophet and is explicitly violently furious about this practice in the Valley of Hinnom.
Which, by the way, is where we get the Hebrew concept of hell, right?
Exactly. Gehenna. God makes it crystal clear. He says, I never asked you to do this.
So God essentially draws a line in the sand.
Yeah.
He separates the divine from this horrific transactional terror.
Yes.
But the concept of a singular evil entity doesn't go away. It just, it evolves.
It evolves because it is too useful to discard.
There's that word again.
I know, but from a purely atheistic or sociological evaluation, the introduction of a singular opposing entity as Satan serves a massive structural purpose for early societies.
How so?
Well, first, it solves the problem of evil for theologians, explaining why bad things happen to good people.
Sure.
But more importantly, it allowed religious clerics to manage their populations.
Ah, the control aspect.
Right. The fear of eternal damnation is arguably the most effective law enforcement tool ever invented. If you break the rules, you don't just go to jail. you burn forever.
Yeah, it's a pretty strong deterrent. And it isn't just a Western concept either. It's a universal human instinct to personify darkness.
Absolutely. We see it everywhere.
Like in Buddhism, you have Mara, right? A demonic king representing evil and temptation.
Yes, often depicted as this frightening mix of human and animal.
Exactly. And in Islam, you have Iblis. Different continents, entirely different eras, yet the exact same psychological mechanisms at play.
It really is. And as we move into Western Europe around the 8th and 9th centuries, the depiction of the devil really solidifies.
That's when we get the classic imagery, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He becomes this monstrous beast, half human, half animal, with horns emerging from the flames. But Christian tradition added a brilliant psychological layer to it.
Which was?
They framed him not just as a beast, but as a fallen, beautiful angel.
Oh, right. The ultimate tempter.
Yes.
Like the famous story of Satan tempting Jesus in the desert.
Exactly.
The devil isn't just standing there with a pitchfork threatening violence. He is offering immense knowledge, mastery, and control over the world.
Which, from a secular perspective, is just a masterclass in narrative design.
How do you mean?
Well, it teaches the listener that the easy path to power is inherently corrupting. It warns that our own desires for control are the actual demons we need to fight.
Okay, but this raises a massive question for me.
Let's hear it.
If Satan is just a brilliant sociological construct designed to explain bad weather, encourage moral adherence, and keep ancient populations in line, how do we explain physical bodies reacting to this construct today?
That is the million-dollar question.
Because it's one thing to invent a boogeyman to explain a drought. It's another thing entirely when an individual is violently convulsing on the floor.
This is exactly where the theoretical hits the intensely physical. We have to look at the practice of exorcism.
Right. Let's talk about that viral video from May 2013.
Oh, the Pope Francis one.
Yeah. Pope Francis is in St. Peter's Square, surrounded by this massive crowd.
I remember that.
He approaches a man in a wheelchair who is believed to be possessed, lays his hands on him, and recites a prayer.
And the reaction was intense.
Totally. The man violently slumps down, his mouth is open, he's heaving. To the entire world watching on YouTube, it looked exactly like the Pope was performing an impromptu exorcism.
And exorcism is quite literally as old as recorded history. We see identical rituals in the ancient texts of the Near East, India, and China.
Really? It goes back that far?
Oh, yeah. But within the Catholic framework, exorcism isn't viewed as a magic spell. It is strictly a prayer invoking divine authority.
Using what they call sacramentals, right? Like holy water, rosary beads, crucifixes.
Exactly.
The mechanism is supposed to be that these objects are physical, symbolic expressions of divine authority that essentially burn or drive out the demonic entity.
Yes, that's the theological understanding.
And the physical symptoms described by working exorcists are just intense.
Beyond intense.
They report subjects with an incredibly evil look in their eyes, superhuman strength, like that example of a 110-pound young woman throwing 3 large men across a room with total ease.
And this is the absolute peak of the tension between supernatural belief and modern science.
It really is.
The claim from exorcists is that dark spiritual forces can literally violate the normal laws of nature.
See, I have to throw a flag on the play here,
I figured you might.
specifically regarding the claims of levitation. You hear these stories of salt of the earth, perfectly credible people witnessing possessed victims floating in midair.
You do hear that a lot.
But if spiritual forces are actively breaking the laws of physics and defying gravity, why is it always just an eyewitness anecdote?
The lack of footage, you mean?
Yes. We live in a society where every single human being has a high-definition camera in their pocket at all times. Where is the undeniable scientific proof of a human being defying gravity?
It is the ultimate sticking point for skeptics, precisely because it completely defies empirical observation.
Exactly.
But if we step back from the supernatural claims for a second, the psychological mechanics of what is actually happening in that room are staggering.
Tell me more about that.
Even prominent exorcists admit that they operate on 2 tracks simultaneously, the spiritual and the psychological.
That fascinated me in the sources. Exorcists note that the demonic presence seems to aggressively feed off internal emotional wounds, deep anger, and unforgiveness.
Exactly. They find that when they start addressing and healing those inner psychological traumas, the so-called demonic entity suddenly has less to feed off of.
That's so interesting.
From a psychiatric perspective, this suggests something incredibly profound about the ritual itself.
It makes me wonder, isn't exorcism essentially a massive, high-stakes spiritual placebo effect?
That's a really compelling way to look at it.
Think about the mechanics of trauma. If you are a deeply traumatized individual, undergoing this incredibly dramatic, authoritative ritual might serve as the ultimate psychological intervention.
It gives them a framework.
Yes, it allows the person to completely externalize their inner demons. They aren't battling their own broken mind anymore. They are battling a literal external monster.
And the ritual gives their brain permission to finally defeat it.
Exactly.
That is a brilliant secular evaluation. It bridges the gap perfectly.
It really makes sense to me.
It explains the undeniable, life-changing relief these individuals feel without needing to prove that someone actually levitated. The human mind's ability to heal itself through profound symbolic rituals is astonishing.
It truly is.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. We don't just project these internal terrors onto our own bodies. When we feel a lack of control, we project those fears outward onto the physical earth itself.
Oh, that's a great point. It's one thing to try and cast a demon out of a human body, an environment we feel we should theoretically have control over.
Right.
But what happens when that same unexplainable dread is permanently carved into the landscape?
Yeah.
You can't exactly perform an exorcism on a mountain.
No, you certainly can't. Geography has always been a canvas for human theology. When we encounter a geological conundrum that defies easy explanation, human nature completely short-circuits.
Which perfectly describes Devil's Tower in northeastern Wyoming.
Man. Devil's Tower is fascinating.
If you haven't seen it, imagine a colossal 900-foot grayish-green rock that looks like a giant striated fist punching straight out of the earth.
It's massive.
And what makes it so jarring, so deeply unsettling, is that it sits in the middle of completely flat sedimentary plains. There is zero other volcanic activity anywhere around it.
It really looks like it shouldn't be there.
It's such an anomaly that President Theodore Roosevelt made it America's very first national monument in 1906 just to protect it.
Geologists understand that it is made of volcanic-type materials, but the exact physical mechanisms that created this singular, massive tower in that highly specific location are still heavily debated.
So it's still kind of a mystery.
Yeah. And as we've discussed, human nature abhors a vacuum of knowledge. When we don't understand how something was formed, we instinctively ascribe mystical, spiritual, or demonic attributes to it.
The irony in the naming conventions here is just wild to me.
Oh, the clash of cultures.
Yeah. You have Western colonizers steeped in that puritanical fear of hellfire we talked about earlier, who roll up on this massive, unexplainable anomaly.
Right, and they're terrified.
Exactly. They feel a sense of dread because they can't conquer or explain it, so they literally name it Devil's Tower.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, the Native American tribes of the area looked at the exact same geological formation and viewed it as a profoundly sacred altar.
Yes. For local tribes, it was a place for divine inspiration and vision quests. Their perspective is that as you physically approach the base of the tower, you can feel a positive, sacred energy building.
It really exposes how our preconceived frameworks dictate reality.
Completely.
One culture looks at a rock and sees the literal handiwork of Satan. Another looks at the exact same rock and sees the sacred presence of the divine. And modern science just sees a magma process we haven't fully mapped out yet.
And in a perfect modern twist, pop culture looks at it and sees extraterrestrials.
Right. The 1970s. Steven Spielberg used Devil's Tower as the iconic alien landing site in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Such a classic.
People in the movie are inexplicably drawn to the tower, making sculptures of it out of mashed potatoes, and eventually Richard Dreyfuss flies off in a UFO.
That movie permanently doubled tourism to the site, by the way.
Wait, really? That's amazing.
Yeah. But think about the psychological shift there. As society became more secular and scientifically advanced, we didn't stop projecting our anxieties onto the unknown.
We just changed the characters.
Exactly. We just swapped out ancient demons for sci-fi aliens. The narrative changed, but the human impulse to project the supernatural onto the unexplainable remained entirely constant.
But, a massive rock in the daylight is one thing. That inspires awe or curiosity.
Right.
What happens when we project that exact same impulse into the dark, vulnerable spaces where our primal prey instincts kick in?
Ah. You are talking about the woods.
I am talking about the Pine Barrens of southern New Jersey. If Devil's Tower is a monument to awe, the Pine Barrens are a monument to pure dread.
They really are.
We are talking about 1 million acres of dense, foreboding woodland.
It is a vast sea of pitch pines and cedar swamps where the canopy is so thick it completely shrouds the undergrowth.
It's just totally dark.
Yeah. You can hear animals moving just feet away, but you can't see them. It is an environment perfectly engineered to strip humans of their sensory dominance.
And out of that sensory deprivation comes the legend of the Jersey Devil.
One of the most famous legends out there.
The physical description alone sounds like it was engineered in a nightmare factory to trigger every human phobia at once.
It's a complete amalgamation.
It really is. It's a hodgepodge. A horse's head with horns, a long body like a dragon or kangaroo, thin bird-like legs ending in cloven hooves.
Giant leathery bat wings.
Yes. A forked tail and a horrific, blood-curdling screech.
It is literally a composite of apex predator traits and unnatural anomalies designed to trigger human pre-drive instincts.
It hits every panic button in our brain.
Exactly. But the truly fascinating element from a sociological standpoint is its origin story. The lore dates back over 250 years to 1735, centering around a woman named Mother Leeds.
The legend says she was giving birth to her 13th child. Exhausted and in agonizing labor, she allegedly cried out, "The devil can take this one."
Such a dramatic start to a myth.
Totally. According to the myth, she gave birth to a normal, healthy baby boy, but within minutes, it mutated in front of her eyes into this demonic creature, beat its wings, flew straight up the chimney, and vanished into the Pine Barrens.
Now, obviously, secular science instantly dismisses the idea of a literal monster born of human flesh, but you cannot dismiss the sociological fallout of that story. It laid a foundation of regional fear that simmered for centuries. And it survived because it was validated by authority.
That is the craziest part to me. We aren't just talking about folklore used to scare children into staying out of the woods.
Not at all.
In the early 1800s, Commodore Stephen Decatur, a highly respected, famous naval war hero, claimed he had a first-hand encounter.
He was a very prominent figure.
Right. He was allegedly testing cannonballs near the woods, saw the creature flying overhead, and literally fired a cannonball at it.
Wild.
He claimed he shot a hole right through its wing, and the beast just kept flying.
When a figure of absolute authority, a prominent, respected military man, steps forward and validates a local ghost story, it completely rewires the psychology of a community.
It makes it real for people.
Exactly. It grants immense legitimacy to the fear. And that established legitimacy is exactly what primed the entire region for the events of January 1909.
The 1909 mass hysteria. When I first read about this, I could not comprehend how an entire modern society just lost its grip on reality.
It was a full-blown panic.
It wasn't just a few spooky shadows in the woods. There was an absolute avalanche of sightings in a single week. People were finding bizarre hoof prints on their snowy roofs. A trolley car full of people in Haddon Heights was allegedly dive-bombed by the creature.
It escalated into a literal societal crisis. Local businesses and schools were completely shut down.
Over a monster.
Yes. Mill workers refused to travel through the woods to get to work. Armed vigilante posses were formed to hunt the woods at night. The Philadelphia Zoo, a respected scientific institution, even offered a $10,000 reward for its capture.
That's insane.
It is a textbook flawless study in mass hysteria.
But how does the mechanism of that actually work? How does a bedrock of religious belief, the ancient fear of hell and demons we discussed with the Valley of Hinnom, suddenly cause a 20th century town to shut down its schools over a winged horsebat?
Well, think of mass hysteria like a feedback loop in a microphone. One person's genuine anxiety, maybe they hear a strange owl screech or see weird tracks in the snow, is the sound. They tell their neighbor, who is already primed by generations of religious conditioning, to fear the devil.
Right, the primer's already there.
Exactly. That neighbor panics, which acts like the microphone picking up the sound. They tell the local paper, which amplifies it through the speaker. Suddenly, the whole region is deafened by a panic that started from a single small noise.
And there's a cultural collision happening there too, right?
Yeah.
Because long before the colonists arrived, the Lenape tribe lived in that area, and they referred to the Pine Barrens as the place of the dragon.
Exactly. You have two completely different cultural understandings bleeding into each other. The Lenape's ancient lore of a dragon-like presence merging seamlessly with the colonists' puritanical, deeply ingrained fear of a literal Christian devil.
It's the perfect storm.
It really is. When you combine an environment that naturally induces sensory deprivation, 1,000,000 acres of dark woods, with a stressful societal trigger, the collective imagination completely overrides logic.
The brain just fills in the blanks.
Yes. The brain interprets every snapping twig or strange shadow through the lens of the monster it has been conditioned to fear.
It is incredible. We've traveled from the literal fire pits of ancient Jerusalem, where human beings sacrificed their own children because they couldn't process the randomness of drought.
Quite a journey.
We've explored the intense psychological battlegrounds of modern exorcisms, where the brain uses the concept of a demon to finally defeat its own trauma.
The placebo effect we talked about.
Right. We've seen how we project our existential dread onto towering, unexplainable geology like Devil's Tower, and how a community's collective anxiety can create a microphone feedback loop of literal panic over a winged beast in the New Jersey woods.
And the connective tissue through all of these eras and locations is the profound, undeniable utility of the concept of evil.
Utility. There's that word again, and now I totally see what you mean.
Whether humanity is trying to control agricultural outcomes, enforce strict moral behavior, heal deep psychological wounds, or simply make sense of a terrifying noise in the dark woods, the devil serves a distinct, powerful human purpose.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to chew on.
Let's hear it.
Whether you believe in God and Satan as literal spiritual entities fighting a cosmic war, or you view them entirely through a secular psychological lens as constructs created by early humans.
The idea of the devil holds immense tangible power over the physical world.
Undeniably, it has the power to shut down schools, to inspire the creation of national monuments, to drop people out of wheelchairs in St. Peter's Square, and to drive human behavior to its absolute extremes.
The concept of evil is without a doubt one of the most powerful forces ever unleashed in human history.
So if the devil is ultimately just a mirror, a reflection of our deepest societal fears, our collective guilt, and our desperate need for a cosmic scapegoat to explain the cruelty of the universe.
What happens if we stop looking in the mirror?
Exactly. What happens to a society if it ever fully stops believing in the devil? If we completely strip away the folklore and the theology, does the evil in the world just vanish because we stop giving it a name?
Or do we simply have to invent a brand new monster to take the blame?
That's the question. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.